Aloha, everybody. It's me, Eva Andrade, President and CEO of Hawaii Family Forum. I'm here at the nation's capital because I wanted to stand here for you. Aloha, everybody. I'm Eva Andrade, and I'm back here on Faith and Politics with my buddy Zach. And the trip coming back from Washington, D.C. was something else. And we're going to talk a little bit about that later in the show. But right now, we're going to jump directly into some issues that we think you, the viewers and listeners, really care about. And we're going to do that by, first of all, introducing you to Zach. And this is what we do here on Faith and Politics. Zach, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
You want to tell our viewers and listeners a little bit about yourself so they can feel like they can bond with you during the show?
Sure. So I have been here in the state of Hawaii for a little under a year. Moved last September. I have a wife and a son. My son, he's about 3.5 years old, and I have another boy who'll be here, Lord willing, any day now.
So what that means, viewers and listeners, is if you suddenly see him look at his phone and charge out of here, then we will be sending blessings to his wife, who very well could be giving birth today, right now, as we speak. Hopefully not, though, right? I mean, wouldn't you kind of want to be there?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Well, I think she wants you to be there too.
Absolutely.
Okay, yeah.
Absolutely.
So just throwing that out there.
Yeah, and I'm 23 years old. So I'm a young parent. I have a young family that's growing, any day now, and I'm really excited for what the future holds for me.
So now the big question is: are you going to stop at 2, or are you going to keep going until the Lord says stop?
Well, we have one boy, we have another boy on the way, and I kind of really want a girl. So I'm thinking we're going to go for another one.
Okay, you're going to end up like my dad, who said that. So he had, my mom and dad had a boy. They had me. Mm-hmm. And then my dad was like, well, let's try for another girl. Mm-hmm. And then they had another boy. So.
Oh, sure. Well, I've also been told that the boys are in my blood because my father's the eldest of 5 boys, and they were doing the same thing. And at the 5th one, they were like, okay, you can't keep trying at that point for a girl because it doesn't seem like it's happening.
That's so funny. But I think it's interesting because you're 23, you said, right? Mm-hmm. And so what we were talking about before we started the show today is that you kind of stand between the Generation Z and the millennials, mm-hmm. In where you are. But you said you identify a little bit more with the millennials.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I do. Just because I think that the reputation you see kind of more with the Gen Z is the people who are down on their phones 24/7, who, when they disconnected from it, it's like they're disconnected from their lifeline. And I don't really feel that way. I also feel like I identify a little bit more with the way the millennial generation grew up, playing outside, drawing on the sidewalk with chalk, playing basketball in the driveway, riding my bike around the neighborhood with friends to the local playground. And I don't feel like we see that a whole lot anymore.
I'm right there with you because I'm kind of in between the boomers and the Generation Xers. And so although I feel for me that I tend to be a little bit more like the boomers in some of the way that I look at life, and yet I'm more like the Generation Xers in all of the technology stuff.
There you go.
So I like that I'm doing that. But so I want to get your opinion on something. Earlier, I was sharing with some people about the younger generation and how they view what pastors preach from the pulpit. Mm-hmm. And do you think that because the access to information is so easy now, that it might affect how somebody's sitting in the pulpit, sitting and listening to what's coming from the pulpit? Are they checking, like, if the pastor's giving great examples about things, do you think they're looking them up and trying to see where they're coming from?
I don't know how much real-time verification there is for things like that. I do know that at this point there's significantly more Bible apps than Bibles that people are using as points of reference for what's happening and what's being spoken about from the pulpit. I don't know. I personally try to remain as focused as possible, so I'm not necessarily doing that verification and that real-time research myself.
See, he's doing it the right way. He's listening to the pastor and not checking on his phone. But unfortunately, I know that there are people that are sitting there playing on their phone. Mm-hmm. I've seen adults do that. Mm-hmm. In fact, I heard a pastor one time say that he was giving a sermon, and what the pastor had done is he had installed some cameras in the church, right? Just so that, he could kind of get a feel of people. When he was looking back at his sermon, mm-hmm. he saw one woman cleaning out her purse. Another guy had his phone. He was watching some ball game or something like that. So, okay, pastors, I'm not telling you to put cameras up in your church. But it goes to the point of where your focus should be when you're in the church building. You really should be listening to the pastor. So I love that you're doing that. So props to you.
I do what I can.
So now you said you came from Florida?
Yes.
So what is your thoughts on, we're going to play a clip really quick of Governor DeSantis.
Okay.
For those of you that have been watching the news, you know that President Biden made a statement, and then Governor DeSantis came back to talk about the statement that Biden made. And I want to get your thoughts on that. So let's play that clip.
I just want to say something quickly. Joe Biden has taken to himself to try to single out Florida over COVID. This is a guy who ran for president saying he was going to, quote, shut down the virus. And what has he done? He's imported more virus from around the world by having a wide open southern border. You have hundreds of thousands of people pouring across every month. And it's not just from Mexico. In fact, it's rarely from Mexico. You have over 100 different countries where people are pouring through. Not only are they letting them through, they're then farming them out all across our communities across this country, putting them on planes, putting them on buses. Do you think they're being worried about COVID for that? Of course not. So he's facilitating. Who knows what new variants are out there? But I can tell you, whatever variants are around the world, they're coming across that southern border. And so he's not shutting down the virus. He's helping to facilitate it in our country. And what is his big solution? What is he so upset about Florida? His solution is he wants to have the government force kindergartners to wear masks in school. He doesn't believe the parents should have a say in that. He thinks that should be a decision for the government. Well, I can tell you in Florida, the parents are going to be the ones in charge of that decision. And one of the major medical people in his administration just recently told parents that they should be wearing masks at home when they're around their own children. This is insane. Joe Biden also believes that vaccination should be mandated by force of government and that you should have to show vaccination status to be able to participate in society. Now, Florida, we're very proud of our Seniors First strategy. You look at the mortality in nursing homes among seniors, it's declined dramatically. But we said from the beginning, we're going to make it available for all, but we're not going to mandate it on anybody. That's ultimately an individual's choice to be able to do it. Biden, he rejects science because he denies the fact that people that recover from COVID have long-lasting immunity. And that's been proven time and time again, and the data is very clear. So his vision is, just like in New York City, restaurants should ban young kids from being able to go in because they're not eligible for vaccination, and law-abiding citizens have to produce proof of their medical records just to go to the gym or attend an event or just to participate in everyday society. He wants that, but yet if you want to vote, he thinks it's too much of a burden to show a picture ID when you're voting. So no voter ID, but have to show your medical papers just to be able to live in everyday life? Give me a break. And so I think the question is we can either have a free society or we can have a biomedical security state. And I can tell you, Florida, we're a free state. People are going to be free to choose to make their own decisions about themselves, about their families, about their kids' education, and about putting food on the table. And Joe Biden suggests that if you don't do lockdown policies, then you should, quote, get out of the way. But let me tell you this. If you're coming after the rights of parents in Florida, I'm standing in your way. I'm not going to let you get away with it. If you're trying to deny kids a proper in-person education, I'm going to stand in your way, and I'm going to stand up for the kids in Florida. If you're trying to restrict people, impose mandates, if you're trying to ruin their jobs and their livelihoods and their small business, if you are trying to lock people down, I am standing in your way, and I'm standing for the people of Florida. So why don't you do your job? Why don't you get this border secure? And until you do that, I don't want to hear a blip about COVID from you. Thank you.
That was a really great statement by Governor DeSantis. Now, do you miss Florida?
Looking back, I don't know that I miss a lot of things about the state. I did move away for a reason, but looking back on how DeSantis has really stepped up and taken charge as a governor, I do look back on that pretty longingly.
Yeah, so we did a segment on faith and politics where I interviewed my counterpart there in Florida, and it was very interesting because he had some very positive things about the governor as well. But I'd like to get your thoughts on his comments to President Biden.
So the strongest statements of that were obviously him saying that he's standing in the president's way when it comes to things like getting children to mask up, preventing children from being able to do in-person learning, which we obviously know for the socialization of children is so key, and taking them out of the classroom for 1, 2, 3, and an indefinite amount of time, in years at this point, we don't even know what the ramifications of that are going to be. So I really appreciated the strength in those statements and how he was saying, I am standing in your way, which is a direct response to something that Biden had said to that, don't stand in the way, essentially. I like that the way he's approaching it is what I think is the more logical approach, in that it's up to you as the individual to do the risk reward assessment as you do in any of your day-to-day activities, and saying you determine what is or isn't safe for you, and then go and live that way insofar as you're not stepping on the rights and safeties of others.
Now, it's interesting. I'd like to see what you think about this. And it's kind of putting you on the spot a little bit, but I think you'll be okay with it. So, a lot of people are upset because what the crackdown that they're seeing on people of the United States
Mm-hmm.
seems to be very different than what is being imposed on immigrants that come into the country, as far as wearing a mask or whether you get vaccinated and all that kind of stuff. Do you feel like, with having the parents should have that right,
Mm-hmm.
right, to make those decisions for their kids? But do you feel like that there's a different set of standards for people coming into the country?
The different set of standards being that they're not necessarily required to be vaccinated coming
Yes.
in, that the mask mandate doesn't seem to be being applied as strongly about whether or not they come in, and that they remain masked all the time. Certainly, and I find it disheartening and somewhat offensive, but I more than anything, I find it to be kind of egregious in that we're being told how we are to parent, and that the children are facing stricter requirements than those people that are coming into the country, and that they're coming in so quickly and freely. Even so, right in the middle of this supposed health crisis, where it would seem that more people coming in are more receptacles and spreaders for the disease.
Well, you would think that the argument would be across the board, right?
Mm-hmm.
So these children, these young children that are coming into this country without parental guidance, are just being set free.
Mm-hmm.
They're being set loose
Mm-hmm.
without the same protections that we are being required as Americans. And I think there's people that are getting really upset about that.
Of course.
Yeah. So in your young mind,
Mm-hmm.
what would the solution be? Do you think there's a solution?
I wouldn't necessarily want to speak on the solution with regards to integration, but I do feel that we can look at the data and see that, within the subpopulation of 18 and under, that's 75 million people in this country, there have been less than 400 deaths from COVID-19. And an extremely small portion of the illnesses have even required hospitalization. We're seeing that for young children, they're not the super spreaders that they were supposed to be, and they're not the ones that are suffering ultimately from this illness the way that we were obviously in the beginning worried that they might be, right? So the data doesn't really seem to be backing up the requirements and the restrictions. I feel that I should be able to put my son in a room with other children to learn, to socialize, to grow and develop, and that he shouldn't be forced to wear a mask. I really don't force him to wear a mask because it's not something that he's understanding about, and he's under 4 years old. It's kind of a burden to try to get a mask on him.
Well, I think anybody who's watched kindergarten classrooms know that having a kid wear something on their face, they're not going to be good at it. They're touching things, they're putting things in their mouth. They eat crayons.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, let's be honest. But I do think that what's good for the goose should be good for the gander. And if we're protecting kids, then it should be, regardless of whether you're an American citizen or whether you're an immigrant, you should be concerned about protecting these kids, if that's the argument, right? If that's the premise. So when we come back, we're going to be talking a little bit more about what's happening right here in the state of Hawaii and some of the current restrictions that have been reimposed and what you, the listener or viewer, might be thinking about that. So we'll be right back.
Kalo Outreach encourages us to give back to our communities across Hawaii. It is personal faith in action, a godly mandate where actions speak louder than words. Join us as we love on our community in practical ways. Visit kalooutreach.com and volunteer, give, or register a community need. Together, we will make a difference to our communities. Kalo Outreach. Nobody delivers good news to Hawaii like Kalo TV delivers the good news, because we're the only local Christian TV station that's right here on island with one singular mission: to take the message of Christ even further. What is our mission? You, the body of Christ, encouraged, growing, empowered.
Come and join us.
Can't wait to meet you. Help us spread the good news.
The only thing missing is you.
Come on out!
Kalo TV, broadcasting aloha 24/7.
Well, it's very good to be back here in the beautiful K-Light studios. The past couple of weeks, I've been traveling, and even though I kind of, just like everybody else, I'm connected to what's happening in the news based on my iPad and my phone. So I kind of was plugging into some of the craziness that was happening here in Hawaii. And I think one of the things that everybody's been talking about, regardless of what state you're at, is the number of COVID cases and the increase and the increase. And so what we were all waiting for is, as the numbers are going up and as the positivity rate increases, are there going to be more restrictions? Are there going to be more lockdowns? And so when the Senate COVID committee had their hearing last week, I did listen to the committee meeting because I was curious, what kind of questions are they asking? And so many of us who watched it knew that more restrictions were going to come. And as you all know, that's what happened this week here in the state of Hawaii. Governor Ige has reinstated the 50% limit on social establishments. That includes restaurants. And so even though some of the businesses are saying that they don't feel like there's going to be a lot of effect on them, everyone who's been around the past year and a half have seen what the lockdowns have done to businesses. Regardless of what side you are on this issue, you're watching some of the mom and pop businesses have not been able to survive. They've had to close. We had to say goodbye to Love's Bakery. And I think for those of us that grew up here in Hawaii, to see something like that go away, it was depressing. It's sad. And yet we know that it's not over. And the reason we know it's not over is because as we're all dealing with the Delta variant, we're preparing ourselves, as we're seeing some of the news reports coming up, that now we have to be watching the Lambda variant. For those of you that know the way the military code goes from Alpha all the way to Zebra, or Zulu, I should say, there are so many variants that are happening with this COVID. It's unbelievable. If you go to the CDC, you can see all the different variants. And I think that what's happening is we're all beginning to just feel a little depressed. We're feeling a little like this is the illness that will never end. You guys remember that song that our kids were playing? I mean, right now all the kids are playing Baby Shark, do Baby Shark, right? So we had to deal with that. But remember the song back from Lamb Chops, the song that never ends? Do you remember that? That's kind of what we all feel like right now. We're in the song that never ends. What variant is coming up next? What more restrictions? And I think that as Christians, first and foremost, we got to look at ourselves and we got to realize that we are bringing something to this community that we live in. And we should always be wearing the garment of Jesus in every circumstance. We're out there. We need to bring peace to this world that is so chaotic right now. People are looking for hope. And the only hope they can reach and get out is that hope that we get in Christ Jesus. And so as Christians, we have this extra foundation that we are able to reach out and hold on to and then take it out into the world, because that's the only way we're going to start bringing some peace into this very chaotic nation. And I'll tell you that as I was paying attention to what was happening here in Hawaii, I was watching more and more unrest. People are tired. People are feeling burdened. People miss the smiles that they have on the faces of the cashiers in the grocery stores and everywhere else that you give your business. You want to see those smiley, happy faces, and you don't behind the mask. Whether children should wear masks or not, this is stuff people are dealing with on a day-to-day basis. In fact, here are some clips of what has happened here in Hawaii with some of the people that are a little tired of the mandates. So as you watch all of this, I know that and I know this because I have a large circle of friends, and I have friends that are on both sides of this issue. I have friends that believe that our duty is to get vaccinated, to wear a mask, to protect other people. I have friends like that. I also have friends that are like, I'm over the mask. I don't want to wear it anymore, and I will not get vaccinated. And then the majority of you who come together to agree that there shouldn't be mandates on the vaccinations. In fact, as Zach mentioned in the segment before, parents should be the ones, and we say this all the time in all the shows we've had, that parents should be the first and foremost educator of their child. They should be given every tool necessary to bring up their children in the way they should go. And we should be able to do that, especially as Christians. We should be able to use the gospel foundation as everything that we do. And we're never going to shy away from that. In fact, one of the things we've talked about on this show is that because we believe in Jesus Christ, because we are Christians, we are always, always, always going to look at every issue through the lens of being a Christian. And so for those of you that walk that walk with us, we appreciate it. And for those of you that don't necessarily agree with us, but maybe agree with some of the things we're saying, we welcome you. E komo mai. Welcome to the show. And we thank you that you always put up with everything that we put out for you. So let's get back to the mandates here in Hawaii. So one of the interesting things is in the paper on the front page, they had to make sure that people understood that the churches are not going to be penalized. And I kind of think that's funny that they had to do that because churches were deemed essential here in Hawaii. And so the newspaper and the media shouldn't have had to remind us that churches are not going to be shut down in this. But as many of you know, churches should never be shut down. Churches should never be forced to close their door because the churches provide something to a community that is necessary. In fact, let's think about this. It was the Christian community that started a lot of the early hospitals because Christians realized that the sick needed to be ministered to. It was the Christians that did public school systems in the early days because Christians understood that kids needed to be educated. If you have an educated young people rising up, then you're going to have educated people that are going to be making decisions that affect all of us because they're the future leaders. And we know that this is important because we're seeing the attack on education today. We're seeing what kids are learning, what the professors are allowed to teach, what they're not allowed to teach. We're having more and more teachers that are reaching out and saying, what are our rights in the public schools? What can we talk about? Because we're being told we can't talk about this, or we have to talk about this. And as we had in one of our previous shows with Gateways to Better Education, there are tools out there for public school teachers on what they can and cannot do. So going back to the lockdowns here in Hawaii, a lot of people are asking, what are our rights? What are our rights? And if you go to the Hawaii Family Forum website, which is hawaiifamilyforum.org, we're going to be providing resources on how you can opt out and what is the proper way to opt out. We're going to provide you with tools and we're going to give you some suggestions on how to do it properly. Because here's the bottom line. If you're pulling one of these opt-out forms from the internet, they may or may not gel with the way we do things here legally in Hawaii. And what lawyers will always tell you when they're looking for people to be on court cases, they want the right people with the right argument so that we can have the right outcome. Because you can have the wrong people with the wrong argument and get a wrong outcome. And so we don't want that to happen. So we want to be able to provide you with the tools. So what do you do with all of this anger that you're experiencing right now? And I realize that I'm talking to some people that are very fed up, people that feel like the government has been abusive in a sense, that the government has come into your front door and they've told you what you need to do and you're tired of it. You're quite tired of it. Well, first of all, we always look to the scriptures. And I cannot find anywhere in the Bible, and I've looked, and so you pastors out there, I want you to send me an email if I'm wrong, but I haven't seen anywhere in the Bible where it says, when there's a battle, run away and hide. I don't think I've seen that in there. I also heard a Christian pastor say a long time ago that when Christians stick their head in the sand, they're posing a very tempting target to the devil. So we can't be sticking our head in the sand. We can't be running away in fear. But I think the Bible also tells us that we must do everything with love and we must do everything with grace. So if you're going to hold a sign and you're going to go down to the Department of Health, or if you're going to do that at the state capitol, we really strongly encourage that you do it with love. You're not threatening people. You're not telling people that bad things are going to happen to them. You're not making threats, because that's not how we deal with things as Christians. We stand for what is right. We will never give in to the enemy, but we will always do it in the way that Christ calls us to do it, because we have to follow the great leadership that Christ did when he walked the earth. And so that's always going to be our goal. So now I realize, though, that I'm also speaking to some of you who believe that all of these arguments happening in the church can just be handled if everybody would just get vaccinated and if everybody would just wear a mask and not argue about it. And I want to tell you that you have a right to that opinion too. Everybody watching this show is going to have a strong opinion one way or the other. But if you're a Christian, there is still the proper way to have these discussions with one another. And I remember a pastor a long time ago. Some of you might remember him. His name was Joseph Garlington. He did a talk one time and he said, the question we always have to ask ourselves is, do you want to be right or do you want to be reconciled? And I think that if we want to be right and we don't care about reconciliation, then we just have to ask ourselves, are we truly followers of the Lord Jesus Christ? Because I do think that reconciliation is important and it is something we need to work forward to. But again, please do not ever mistake somebody's need for reconciliation with weakness, because that's not always the case. Again, we hold each other accountable because that's what Christians do. So if I do anything wrong, I expect, and it's already happened, where some of you will email me or text me at eva@kalotv.com and say, hey, agree with you on this, don't agree with you on that. And that's okay. And I think the other thing too is, if you like this show, then we want you to support it. And you do that by sending in a check to Kalo. I mean, there's no simple way to do this. We can't just, try and gloss it over. It costs money to put a show like this together. And it requires prayer. And it requires people standing with us. And so go to kalotv.com. and find out how you can partner. And what about K-Light Radio? Every day putting shows out there that are leading people to a closer walk with Jesus. Go to klight.org or kalotv.com and partner with us today. We'll be right back.
Kalo Outreach encourages us to give back to our communities across Hawaii. It is personal faith in action, a godly mandate where actions speak louder than words. Join us as we love on our community in practical ways. Visit kalooutreach.com and volunteer, give, or register a community need. Together, we will make a difference to our communities. Kalo Outreach. Nobody delivers good news to Hawaii like Kalo TV delivers the good news, because we're the only local Christian TV station that's right here on island with one singular mission: to take the message of Christ even further. What is our mission? You, the body of Christ, encouraged, growing, empowered.
Come and join us.
Can't wait to meet you. Help us spread the good news.
The only thing missing is you.
Come on out.
Kalo TV, broadcasting aloha 24/7.
So let's talk about travel. because I don't know how many of you have traveled over the last year, but I traveled over the 2 weeks. I went from Hawaii to Washington, D.C., and then from Washington, D.C. to Colorado Springs, and then back to Hawaii. So what that means is I was on 6 planes in 2 weeks. Of those 6 planes, 4 were delayed. And I will tell you that even me, I'm the kind of person, I really do try to be patient and kind. You know, all that stuff I said earlier about trying to have Jesus, wearing Jesus as a garment. I really try that. But let me tell you, it has been trying to do so when you're traveling. First of all, for those of you that understand this, you get to the airport and you're either going to be in the TSA pre-check or you're not. And if you're not in the TSA pre-check, you are in a line with people who are already irritated. They're wearing masks. Half of them don't want to wear masks. And we'll say half of them don't want to wear masks. People are angry. People are pushing. In fact, it's funny. I have to share with you one story. So I'm standing in this line and I'm annoyed. Everyone's annoyed. You can feel it in the air. You can just feel that people are upset. So the woman in front of me turns around and she lifts her hand up. And I thought she wanted a high five. So I just kind of high fived her, right? And she got very upset and she goes, "I'm telling you, you are too close to me." And the guy behind me thought it was the funniest thing. And I'm laughing because I'm thinking, okay, I thought you're trying to give me, what is this? What is this? You know? So this is what we're dealing with. We're dealing with crazy, angry, frustrated people, and then the people in between that are trying to keep everything calm. But I want to share with you an interesting conversation I heard between a co-pilot and a flight attendant. So one of the planes that got delayed, it got delayed so much that it caused me to miss my connecting flight, which caused me to miss my transfer. So me, along with a lot of other people, we were on the phone and in lines trying to get our next ticket taken care of. And I'm sitting there and I'm listening to the co-pilot, who was female, and she's talking to a flight attendant. And she says, this is what she said. She said, "This is what happens when you pay people to stay home." Because what was happening was all 4 of those planes that I told you got delayed because they were waiting for a flight crew, because they didn't have enough people to fill the flight crew. And they cannot take off unless they have exactly the flight crew they need. And so now 4 times. So I was irritated about this. And then what was interesting is what the flight attendant said back. She said, "Yes. And for those of us that show up to work, we're working double shift and people are taking it out on us." And that really broke my heart, because we are getting angry at the people who are just trying to do their job. And we need to remember, again, to bring Christ in all things. So one of the things I did on the trip was I was able to talk with some of my counterparts from the blue states. And what I want to share with you right now is I caught up with Nicole and Andrew from Massachusetts and Delaware. And I want to share with you that interview right now.
Aloha, everybody. I'm really privileged to be here today in this beautiful state of Washington, D.C. with a brother and a sister from a blue state, because I wanted to share with you that the battles we're facing in Hawaii and sometimes the struggles we're facing, we're not in it alone. There are champions across this great nation that I stand very proudly with. And I've got Nicole Tice from the beautiful state of
Delaware, the first state.
And Andrew Reckitt from the beautiful state of
the Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
Okay. So what I want to share with our viewers today, and I'd love to get your thoughts, because in Hawaii, we're always fighting against the bad bills that come up. So the first question I want to get is what you're dealing with in your state. What right now in your blue state are you having to fight?
Well, a lot of times in the blue states, it's very similar what we're having to deal with, because it's not happening in just one state. There's a higher agenda. There's special interest groups pushing things down that we all deal with. So in our state, of course, there's always a life issue. A big issue right now is parental rights, and always religious liberty. So we are looking at how all these policies impact the family. So a big one that we're working on is an equal rights amendment, where we have legislators that want to add sexual orientation and gender identity, a behavior, in an ERA, which is an amendment that changes our state constitution and gives it the heaviest weight that could have. So that stands to be a huge problem that overturns so much. And when we ask the attorneys, what does this mean for religious liberties? Can we even have religious liberty exemptions or, statements of faith that we all live by in organizations? And the answer that I get is it has to go through the courts. So that means that Christian organizations are very vulnerable to being sued and lawsuit after lawsuit in order for us to figure out what this really means.
And we're going to come back to Nicole in a few minutes to let her tell you how do you bring your faith into the public square when you're always dealing with these negative things. So we'll get some positive thoughts from Nicole, but let's go to the beautiful state of Massachusetts. And before we do that, I know all you Portuguese brothers and sisters of mine that are watching this, we know we have a lot of our brothers and sisters there in Massachusetts. So that's just kind of a side note. Andrew, what are you dealing there in Massachusetts?
Well, I guess unfortunately we're not dealing with the ERA because most of what would be in the ERA was passed in Massachusetts years, if not decades ago. And the fallout from some of that, early on you had Catholic Charities get out of the adoption business because they would have had to have placed children with same-sex couples. And more recently, the gender identity issue with this bathroom bill. So you have, for example, men can go to women's restrooms and locker rooms and homeless shelters.
Right.
We had a homeless shelter that was sued because they're a single-sex homeless shelter. And they tried to, enforce that, which is part of their mission, and they got sued successfully by someone who was one sex but identified as the other. And we had a situation where a beauty spa run by two women turned away a man who wanted a Brazilian bikini wax, is what he was asking for, and he filed a claim as well. And that's exactly what is permissible and required under these ERA types of laws.
So, Andrew, we have those same statutes already, just like Massachusetts. But the ERA, actually putting it in the Constitution of the state, from a legal perspective, do you have any input that you
for example, one of the, benefits of us having, for example, sexual orientation as a protected class in Massachusetts law so early, it was 1989, was that they also, in order to get it passed, had to include an exemption for religious organizations. Right. And that's one of the things that the ERA, so at the federal level, I'm assuming also at the state level, would do away with.
Yes.
So it's a much more brutal, hardline approach to these things.
Yeah.
So listeners and viewers, you can understand that living in a state like Hawaii, which is very blue, we always feel like we're fighting bad things. We're always feeling overwhelmed, that we're always up against all these obstacles. But living in a blue state can have a blessing too. Nicole, do you have any good thoughts of things happening in your state, even though your state is so blue?
Well, it gives us opportunity to really come together and be unified when we have to I say stand against these things, but it gives us an opportunity to really define and articulate what we stand for and that it's worth fighting for. So a lot of what we do is there's just a lot of merit to changing the court of public opinion. And a lot of times these really bad pieces of legislation allow us the opportunity to speak truth and really have the right needed conversations that we need to have. For example, why is abortion so bad? And what happens in the process of abortion? Why do we stand so strongly and passionately on this issue? So it creates opportunities for lots of conversations and for us to be intentional as parents and intentional in the body of Christ and shepherding well when it comes to applying the truth of the gospel to these moral issues of our day. So I would say living in a blue state definitely means we are more deliberate in what we do. We look for opportunities for unity all the time, and it sharpens us. It also creates opportunity for conversations and sharing the gospel within those halls of power with the influencers. But something that we always say in our state is that a win is when truth is advanced. Really, really important. We always ask ourselves whenever we've engaged in one of these battles, did we advance the truth? Did we change hearts and minds? And if we can say yes to that, then we have done what God has called us to do. The other thing I would remind everyone to keep in mind, and this is really critically important, never underestimate the power of your voice, your influence. What we've heard and seen just in our time together here is that one person that is trained and strategically placed, and God has a way of doing that, will take territory. You can influence the people around you and create culture wherever you are. God has made us to do that. And you have the ability to influence those people around you with the truth. So never underestimate what it means when you speak up and you do it the right way.
And we know that's why you watch programs like this, is because you're looking for that voice. You want to be part of the movement. And we really appreciate that you do that. Andrew, last words, positive.
Sure. Well, to kind of echo what Nicole said, we have a lot of diversity in our program and movement in Massachusetts. The left likes to talk about having cultural diversity, but they tend to define that as either sexual behavior and identity or skin color, just by itself. Whereas we've got, in the churches we work with, not just Protestant and Catholic, a lot of Latino churches, we've got Anglican Ethiopians, all the way to Ukrainian charismatics, and everything in between.
Wow.
And it's really a lot of these sort of recent immigrant churches who really see what is going on and want to do something about it, because they came to America for the things that we cherish, the family values that we cherish. That was how they saw America, and they see that starting to slip away. And they really value it, so they're willing to fight for it. And I think it's helping to mobilize some of the churches that have people that have been here for a long time and aren't as motivated yet, but it's grown.
Amen. So for those of you watching, if you've got family members that live in these two beautiful states, make sure that you like this video, share it with your friends, and reach out to these two guys and gals. Don't want to make anybody mad here. Reach out, because we are trying to do something great in this nation by working together in unity in spite of all the odds. So mahalo to both Andrew and Nicole, and we'll see you next time. Mahalo, everybody.
So I apologize that in that interview you do hear some of the noise that's happening, but that was actually at the conference in Washington, D.C., and that was at the end of the conference, and so people were trying to get in and out. So I do apologize for that meeting. But I want you to notice that both Nicole and Andrew, they've worked long and hard, as I have, representing a blue state, which is not easy to do. When you're representing a blue state and you hear all these great, wonderful things that are happening in the red states, you get people in your own community that go, why can't we do that? Well, here in Hawaii, just like with Delaware and just like with Massachusetts, we're limited on what we can do to push good legislation forward. But as Nicole said, it has given us an opportunity to bring unity to people, to fight for something. And what she said was important. She said to fight for truth. Are we doing everything in our power to take truth one more step forward? And if we've done that, then we've been successful. And so having said that, are we bringing truth into the public square? Is that what we're doing? And if that's what we're doing, then let's give hands up, thumbs up, applause, high five to everybody who is always trying to bring truth into the public square, which is why you are watching Kalo TV, you're watching YouTube Live, and you're listening on K-Light Radio, because we're bringing the truth to you. And that, my friends, is a win. So in the next segment, when we come back, we're going to hear what's happening in New York and California, blue states as well, but we're going to end on some positive notes. So we'll be right back.
Kalo Outreach encourages us to give back to our communities across Hawaii. It is personal faith in action, a godly mandate where actions speak louder than words. Join us as we love on our community in practical ways. Visit kalooutreach.com and volunteer, give, or register a community need. Together, we will make a difference to our communities. Kalo Outreach. Nobody delivers good news to Hawaii like Kalo TV delivers the good news, because we're the only local Christian TV station that's right here on island with one singular mission: to take the message of Christ even further. What is our mission? You, the body of Christ, encouraged, growing, empowered.
Come and join us.
Can't wait to meet you. Help us spread the good news.
The only thing missing is you.
Come on out.
Kalo TV, broadcasting aloha 24/7.
Welcome back to Faith in Politics. You're watching on Calo TV and you're listening on K-Light Radio. And what we're going to do now is we're going to jump into the interview that I was able to do with Jason McGuire and Jonathan Keller of California and New York, my counterparts there. And they're going to talk a little bit about what's happening in their blue states. And I think you'll appreciate it. So let's see what they have to say.
Aloha, everybody, and welcome back. I am now I call these two my bookends. Again, we're continuing our discussion with our blue states. And the reason I call them my bookends is we've got New York here, Jason McGuire, and we've got California, Jonathan Keller. And for all of my brothers and sisters out there, you know that I keep complaining about California. What happens in California does not stay in California. It ends up on Hawaii's shore. But many of you have also talked about the things that have happened in New York, especially with what they're doing on the issue of abortion. So rather than me keep drilling these things, I thought it might be better if they talk to you. So let's start with Jason, because abortion is a big issue right now. People are talking about that. Let our viewers know, blue state, your issues.
Yeah, well, in 2019, our state, New York, the Empire State, passed the Reproductive Health Act, the RHA, but we still refer to as Governor Andrew Cuomo's Late-Term Abortion Expansion Act. And essentially, that Late-Term Abortion Expansion Act, it just did away with any restrictions, any regulations on abortion. It blew it wide open. And so much so that in New York today, they are building new Planned Parenthood facilities, anticipating that New York State will become the abortion capital of the country. What that means is, essentially, people from other states will now come to New York as a part of the abortion tourism industry, and some of those new Planned Parenthood facilities will be just peppered throughout my state. And so we really shamefully, to our shame, will become the abortion capital of the country.
And we're no strangers to that. My Hawaii friends, is that Planned Parenthood bought that $8.3 million building in the middle of Honolulu because we represent the Planned Parenthood of the Greater Northwest, of which you guys are. So what's happening over there in California?
Well, in California, it's very similar. And I think Jason and I always joke between New York and California, we unfortunately have kind of a morbid competition to see who can be more pro-abortion and more extreme on those issues. As an example, in our state, on the insurance front, we already had been flouting federal law and essentially saying that you had to offer abortion in every single health insurance plan sold in the state of California. That's a gross violation of the Weldon Amendment, and yet they've continued to do it. Well, now under the new Joe Biden administration, they know that unfortunately there's going to be no enforcement, so they've gone a step further. And legislation this year that they're preparing to enact would not only require every insurance plan in the country to offer abortion coverage, but it would actually forbid them from charging any deductibles and any copays. I mean, Jason, like you said, this bill has an official name, but we basically call it the Free Abortion for All Act. And not only is it going to mandate that every abortion in the state of California, whether it's paid for by private insurance or paid for by our Medicaid program, Medi-Cal, it will both of those will mean that every abortion is at no cost to the woman, but it will also be a massive transfer of money to Planned Parenthood. I mean, we've all heard about the horrible fraud and waste and abuse that goes on in both insurance and government-run healthcare. Planned Parenthood and other abortion industry cronies are now going to be able to basically name their price, and they know that it's going to be whatever they say is what the insurance company is going to have to pay. It's never going to be a free market, as horrible as that is. It's never going to be something that even the individual is going to have to pay for. So it's going to be a huge cash gift to Planned Parenthood.
It's interesting. We always talk about no cost for abortion, free abortion. Well, abortion's never free. Even if a woman doesn't have to pay the fee for the abortion, there is a price to pay. Family pays, the loss of the child pays. There's so many other things that come along with that. And one of the things that, if you listen to something like this, it can sound kind of discouraging. We're talking about the pro-life issues, right? Because we're in these very difficult states for those issues. But I'm encouraged because I watch what's happening with the window to the womb. I watch what's happening today with a generation that's rising up that's more pro-life than ever before. And I believe that within our lifetime, we're going to see Roe overturned. And I believe that even in my state, in your state, we're going to see repudiation of the abortion policies that we have, that we will be pro-life states. And so there are things to look for that are positive, even in the very dire straits that we're in right now. This is not the end of the story.
Yeah, and we'll come back to Jonathan in a minute to get what he sees as positive. But since I have these two guys here, I did not ask our other guests this question, but it does affect these guys, so I want to get their opinion on this. In Hawaii, we're fighting the marijuana because there's a big push to get it legalized recreationally. Now, these two states have it. So let's start with California since it started with you and get your thoughts on legalized marijuana.
Yeah, we passed legalization as a ballot proposition in 2016, and it has been kind of this slow rolling tidal wave across the state. They have still actually, fortunately, they've struggled to actually implement it as widely as I think they would like to, because on a county by county basis, a lot of counties have been concerned and have pushed back. But unfortunately, we've seen even in my own county, conservative Central California, Fresno County is now starting to open up because they see that tax revenue that supposedly is going to come.
Sound familiar?
But the reality is, we know, and Jason, you can speak to this, the same way abortion is never free, even these so-called benefits of tax revenue, that is a true devil's bargain. I mean, the societal after effects, even if it moderately juices state, county, municipal revenues, the cost on the back end is enormous.
You know, in New York, I would just say we're similar to California in the sense that we just legalized it this year, and they're not yet fully implementing where they want to go. It's going to take some time for that to happen, but there is a cost. In New York State, you cannot ban it at the county level. It's at the town level. And so if my town bans it, but a town 2 miles down the road doesn't, the effects are still going to be very much felt in my town. So we're concerned about that issue. But I think what people fail to realize is that we're talking about big pot. It's really hashtag big pot. We're not talking about a person who's a libertarian growing it in their backyard. This is about a drug that is stronger than it was back when people talk about the hippies in the 60s and all that kind of thing. There is an addictive nature to it. By design, there's an addictive nature to it. There's a reason why you see Pop-Tarts, not Pop-Tarts, Pop-Tarts, why you're seeing all sorts of marijuana gummies and other things. They are targeting a younger and younger audience, similar to what Joe Camel did a generation ago. And so that's what you're experiencing with marijuana when it moves to your state. The other thing I would say regarding marijuana is in our state, it began with a decriminalization process. And so where it begins with decriminalization, it never ends there. The goal is to get to full legalization. And it's not just marijuana. We're seeing that same journey that was going from marijuana, what began as decriminalization, moving to full legalization, now is looking at prostitution as decriminalization on the way to full legalized prostitution.
And in California, we're talking now other drugs, right, that are pretty serious. So.
Yeah, we've had attempts this year, for example, following some very small test cases, and I think the city of Denver and somewhere, maybe Portland, Oregon, we're trying to legalize psilocybin, which is essentially magic mushrooms. There was even remarkably, now this ended up being even a bridge too far for the California legislature, but in the initial draft of this bill, they actually were legalizing ketamine. Well, I didn't even know what that was. It's a date rape drug. And yet they were saying supposedly there were some health advantages for individuals without even thinking of the Pandora's box you're going to open. Unfortunately, that's out of the current version of the bill, but that just shows how incredibly radical many of these legislators are and how far they're pushing the envelope.
Well, and of course, you guys have heard me say this all the time, that with bad legislation, it's never finished. There's always more that they want. And Jason, you and I were talking about that. And so every time a bad bill passes, we don't want you to go away. We don't want you to get overwhelmed. We don't want you to feel like there's not more to be done, because there's always going to be work to done. I want to get your thoughts, though, a positive thing about living in a blue state. Give our listeners and viewers some hope.
Well, similar to the other question you asked about faith in politics and other things like that, I think that it is really important for us as followers of Jesus, no matter what denomination you are, whether you're Greek Orthodox, you're evangelical, you're Catholic, I think it's so important for us to remember that God has called us to this time and place in history, and He's even called us to this time and place geographically, in whichever state we're in. And we're just finishing this great conference here in our nation's capital, and I was so encouraged just to be reminded that no matter where you are, no matter where you live there in Hawaii, no matter what your role is, we all have a part to play, and we all have an opportunity to really stand up for truth and righteousness. And it may not immediately translate to electoral successes. It may not immediately translate even into policy successes. But we know that we're called to this for the long term. And you look back at great moral campaigns in history, William Wilberforce fighting to abolish the slave trade. That was not a 5-year process or a 10-year process. That was an almost 50-year process for him. And it's something that I think we need to be reminded. There's a the great Bible verse, and I hope and pray that Bible verses never become cliched, but it's so important that we will reap a harvest. We must not grow weary in doing good, for we will reap a harvest if we do not give up.
Jason, word of hope.
Well, I think people ask how I can be in a state like New York and not get discouraged. My hope was never in this world. And so when I come from that perspective and I realize that my hope is not tied to any political party, it's not tied to a candidate, it's not tied to a state house, when I realize that ultimately my citizenship is in heaven, well, that makes a difference. And so I don't have to have a hope in this world, but I do have a command to go into the world and to be salt and light. That's why it matters what happens in California or New York or Hawaii, to watch what you're doing, even the important work that you're doing, standing up and having a voice, whether you're putting out fires like we so often have to do in our states. We wish we could advance more good legislation, but oftentimes it's putting out the fires or it's keeping the home fire burning, helping people realize the importance of these issues and being educational in nature and reminding people about life and marriage and religious liberty and the biblical concepts of justice and mercy. That's an important thing that God has called us to do.
All right. And as I told you the last time, if you have friends and relatives that live in these two beautiful states, make sure that you like and share the video with them because they need your support and help as well. So make sure you plug in. And for those of you living in red states that may be watching this, please pray for all of us that fight in the blue states because we covet your prayers as always. Stay plugged in. Faith in Politics. Our foundation is in Jesus Christ, and we'll be here as long as he calls us to do so. Mahalo, everybody.
What I truly love about my counterparts, and I think that one of the things I really appreciate about these conferences is not only do we get to be excited and congratulate our red state compatriots on the great work they're doing, is that I get to commiserate with the blue state directors. And I think I love the fact that all of us look at what we're doing with hope. Because we all believe that we're doing a ministry that God has called us to do. It's not easy. And so, as always, we covet your prayers, not only for me here in the state of Hawaii and for all the people that work in this line of work, but across the nation, because in almost every state, there is somebody fighting for gospel values. So just lift them up in prayer when you think about them. And I think the other thing I appreciate is that they always look to the gospel for the impetus to give us the power to do what we need to do. And without the power of the Holy Spirit, we might as well just throw in the towel. And that it doesn't matter what you do, whether you're a nurse or whether you're a police officer or a teacher or even a stay-at-home mom or dad. The Holy Spirit is what gives us the power that we need in order to accomplish all the great things. And one of the things we can learn from Moses is that although Moses didn't get to go into the promised land, he was able to be a part of the greater blessing for the Israelite community when they crossed into the promised land. So sometimes we may not get to taste the glory, but it's our responsibility to participate in it and to be open to that participation. And I think that's what we're all learning, is that even with a lockdown like this, God still has a plan for us and there's still things for us to do. I appreciate so much the fact that all of you take your time every week to plug into Faith in Politics. I thank William Harrison for holding down the fort for the 2 weeks with the great interviews that happened. I appreciate the workers behind the scenes for Kahlo TV and K-Light Radio that make this happen. I appreciate Hawaii Family Forum for blessing this ministry financially. And we're asking you to do the same thing. But stay plugged in, because we've got some great things coming up for next week. So we'll see you next week. Mahalo, everybody. Thanks for hanging in there.